My name is Sophia, and if there is one constant truth in my life, it is this. I have always found more comfort in the quiet company of books than in the loud, unpredictable world of people. Words, bound in leather and paper, were my oldest friends. They offered worlds of adventure, romance, and tragedy without ever asking for anything in return. My own life, by contrast, felt simple, a story written in plain prose. I was a student of literature, a choice that surprised no one who knew me, and I spent my days deciphering the lives of fictional characters, never imagining I was about to stumble upon a real-life story far more poignant than any I had ever read. It all began on a stuffy evening in late July, the kind where the air is thick with the scent of impending rain and memories. My grandmother, Eleanor, had passed away 3 months prior, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than any sound, and a house. Her house wasn't a mansion or a grand estate. It was a modest, two-story cottage with a climbing rose bush that had stubbornly wrapped itself around the front porch railing, a testament to her patient and persistent nature. And it was now my responsibility to sort through the artifacts of her 82 years on this earth. Each room was a chapter of her life. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and cloves. The living room, with its worn armchair positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun, felt like she had just stepped out for a moment. But the final, unread chapter was the attic. My grandmother rarely spoke of it, calling it a tomb of forgotten things. I had always imagined it as a dark, spider-infested space, but as I pushed open the creaking door at the top of a narrow staircase, I was met not with darkness, but with a cathedral of dust-filled light. A single circular window at the far end cast a golden beam through the hazy air, illuminating dancing motes of dust like tiny, forgotten stars. The attic was hot and smelled of old wood, dried lavender, and the crisp, sweet scent of aging paper. It was packed not with chaos, but with orderly stacks of boxes, each neatly labeled in my grandmother's elegant cursive, Christmas ornaments, father's war medals, my wedding dress. It was a museum of a life lived quietly but with great care. I spent hours that evening lost in time. I found faded photographs of a young, smiling Eleanor with a sparkle in her eye I had only seen in my own reflection. I unwrapped her wedding dress from its delicate tissue paper, a cascade of ivory lace that seemed to hold the ghost of her joy. I held my grandfather's war medals, cold and heavy with a history I could only guess at. My grandfather, a kind but quiet man, had died long before I was born. My grandmother had loved him deeply. She spoke of him with a gentle reverence that made their love story feel like a sealed, perfect thing. She never remarried, never even seemed to look at another man. She was content, or so I thought, in her garden, with her books, and with the memories she held close. It was nearly midnight when my fingers, coated in a fine layer of gray dust, brushed against a small, unlabeled wooden box tucked away behind a stack of old vinyl records. It was different from the others. It wasn't cardboard, it was dark cherry wood, with a small, tarnished brass latch. It felt important. My heart gave a little flutter of anticipation, the way it always did when I was about to start a new book. With a soft click, the latch gave way. The inside was lined with faded blue velvet. There was no jewelry, no precious trinket. There was only a single envelope, yellowed with age, lying face down. I lifted it out. The paper was thick and brittle, and for a moment, I was afraid it would crumble in my hands. I turned it over. It was a letter, but it had never been opened. The wax seal on the back, once a deep crimson, was now a faded maroon, but it remained unbroken. On the front, in a strong, masculine script that leaned slightly to the right, were words that made the air in my lungs freeze. To the one I truly love, 1985. My first thought was of my grandfather. But he had passed away in 1980. This letter was written 5 years after his death. The address was my grandmother's, but there was no name, only that heart-stopping dedication. Who is this for? And why was it addressed to the one he truly loved? A cold knot of confusion and a strange, protective sadness for my grandmother tightened in my chest. She was a widow. She was faithful to my grandfather's memory. This didn't make sense. My curiosity, that relentless engine that drove my love for stories, won out over my hesitation. I told myself that understanding her life was the most respectful thing I could do. Using a delicate silver letter opener I'd found earlier, I carefully slit the top of the envelope, trying my best not to tear the fragile paper. The unbroken seal on the back felt like a sacred promise I was about to break. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. As I unfolded it, the scent of old ink and raw, preserved emotion seemed to rise from the page. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, bold and clear, yet with a slight tremor in certain strokes, betraying a nervousness that the confident script tried to hide. I took a deep breath, sat down on an old traveling trunk, and began to read under the single, bare bulb that lit the attic. My dearest Eleanor, I wonder if you will ever read these words. I have written this letter 100 times in my mind, on 1,000 different nights, but my courage has always failed me at the last moment. It is a coward's confession, I know, to write what I dare not speak. But I cannot bear the thought of leaving without telling you, even if it is only to this silent page. My name is Michael. You do not know me well, though I feel I have known you a lifetime. I am the young man who works at the town bookshop, the one who always makes sure to set aside the latest historical novels for you. I see you every Tuesday afternoon. You come in after, tending to your garden, sometimes with a smudge of dirt still on your cheek, your hands strong and capable. You have the most incredible smile, a quiet, gentle thing that appears when you find a book you have been searching for. It lights up the entire dusty old shop. You probably think I am just a quiet, awkward boy behind the counter, and perhaps I am. But in my heart, I am a poet, and you, Eleanor, are the only poem I have ever wanted to write. I know you're a widow. I know you loved your husband, and I respect that memory with all my heart. I do not wish to tarnish it or intrude upon your grief. That is why I have remained silent. To speak would feel like a desecration of something holy. But silence is its own kind of torture. I have watched you for 3 years. I have seen you carry your burdens with a grace that stills my breath. I have seen you be strong for everyone around you. I have seen the flicker of loneliness in your eyes when you think no one is looking. I see you, Eleanor. I see the woman who loves the scent of old books, who has the patience to coax roses into blooming, who hums softly to herself when she's reading the first page of a new story. I see the kindness in the way you speak to everyone, the strength in the set of your shoulders. I fell in love with you not in a single moment, but slowly, then all at once. It was in the small things, the way you bit your lip when concentrating, the compassion in your eyes when you spoke of your daughter, the way the afternoon sun would catch the silver strands in your hair. I am not a wealthy man. I am not a war hero. I am just a man who sells stories for a living, and I have foolishly written you into the center of my own. I am leaving town next month. I have received a scholarship to study architecture at a university far from here. It is the opportunity of a lifetime, and I must take it. But the thought of leaving without you ever knowing how profoundly you have affected my life is a weight I cannot carry. I do not expect anything from you. I do not ask for a reply. I only want you to know that you were and are deeply and completely loved. From a distance, in silence, but with the entire force of my heart. Perhaps in another life, I would have been brave enough to walk up to you, to speak these words instead of writing them. But in this one, all I have is this letter, a testament to a love that was too timid to announce itself. I will leave this in your mailbox on my last day. Maybe you'll find it. Maybe you'll throw it away. Or maybe, just maybe, you will read it and know that in a small, dusty bookshop, there was a man who saw you not as a widow, not just as a mother, but as the magnificent woman you are. With all my love, forever. Michael. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face, hot and silent. They dripped onto my hands, which were trembling as I held the delicate paper. This wasn't just a letter, it was a soul laid bare. A complete, beautiful, tragic story contained in a few hundred words. Michael, the man from the bookshop. My grandmother had spent her entire life loving books, and all this time, a man who sold them had been loving her from afar. He had seen her, truly seen her, in a way maybe no one else had. And she never knew. The letter was here, in the attic, in a box, unopened. He must have lost his nerve. He never left it in her mailbox. He had kept his love a secret, and so had she unknowingly. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. Sadness for Michael, whose love was so pure and yet so silent. And an even deeper sadness for my grandmother. She had lived the rest of her life, nearly 40 years, without ever knowing this. She had lived a good life, a content life, but what if this letter could have brought her a different kind of joy? A companionship in her later years? Or was her love for my grandfather so complete that it left no room for another? I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter clutched in my hand, the attic growing cold as the night wore on. The single bulb above me hummed a lonely tune. My grandmother's life, which I had always seen as a simple, straightforward narrative, had suddenly gained a hidden, secret chapter. A ghost story of a love that never was. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by her favorite window in the living room, the one that looked out over her now wild rose garden. I held the letter, reading it over and over again until I had memorized every curve of Michael's handwriting. I whispered into the darkness, to the ghost of my grandmother, to the silence of the house. Some stories never get told, but love always finds a way to live on. But as I said the words, they felt hollow. This love hadn't lived on. It had been buried in a cherrywood box for 40 years. The next morning, a fierce resolve had replaced my sadness. This story wasn't over. Michael had written that he was leaving, not that he had vanished from the earth. He was a young man in 1985. He would be in his late 50s or early 60s now. Was he still out there somewhere? I felt a sudden, desperate need to find him. It wasn't just for my grandmother anymore, it was for him. He deserved to know that his letter, his beautiful, heartbreaking confession, had finally been read. My quest began where his story had been centered, the Old Town bookshop. It was still there, though it was now called Modern Reads and sold more coffee than classics. The dusty, magical place Michael described was gone, replaced by bright lights and shiny shelves. But I took a chance and spoke to the owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable who had inherited the shop from her father. When I mentioned a young man named Michael who worked there in the mid-80s, her eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, Michael Sheridan. Of course, I remember him. Such a shy, clever boy. Always had his nose in a book. Head full of dreams about buildings and old cities. He went off to university to become an architect, you know. Made something wonderful of himself, I hear." My heart leaped. "Do you know what happened to him? Where he went?" She thought for a moment, tapping a long finger against her chin. "His family moved away years ago. But I do remember he sent my father a Christmas card one year from Philadelphia. Said he'd started his own firm there. Sheridan and Associates. Such a lovely boy. I always wondered why he never married a local girl." Philadelphia. It was a solid lead. That afternoon, I was no longer a literary student sorting through old belongings. I was a detective on the trail of a 40-year-old love story. A quick search online confirmed it. Sheridan and Associates, a prestigious architectural firm in Philadelphia, founded by Michael Sheridan. There was a photo of him on the company website. He was older, with silver at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes, but the face was kind, and I could still see the shy, clever boy Mrs. Gable had described. For a week, I debated what to do. Should I call? Write an email? It felt too impersonal, too cold for a story this deeply human. I needed to see him, to deliver the message of his finally read letter in person. I needed to look him in the eye and tell him that his words had not been lost to the void. So, I bought a plane ticket. It felt impulsive, crazy even. I packed a small bag, and in a special compartment, I placed the cherrywood box with the letter nestled safely inside. The flight to Philadelphia was surreal. I read over the letter again, trying to imagine the man who had written it. What was his life like now? Had he found love? Did he ever think of the woman who bought historical novels on Tuesday afternoons? His office was in a sleek, modern glass building that he had likely designed himself. It was a world away from the dusty bookshop of his youth. My palms were sweating as I gave his name to the receptionist. I felt like a ghost from a past he had long since left behind. He agreed to see me, his secretary's voice polite but confused as to the nature of my visit. I was led into a spacious, light-filled office with panoramic views of the city. Blueprints were scattered over a large desk, and models of elegant buildings lined the walls. And there, standing by the window, was Michael Sheridan. He turned, and his smile was warm and questioning. "Miss? How can I help you?" My throat was dry. Words, my oldest friends, suddenly deserted me. I simply held out the small cherrywood box. "My name is Sophia," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "My grandmother was Eleanor. I found this in her attic. I believe it belongs to you." He looked at the box, and a storm of emotions crossed his face, confusion, then a flicker of dawning recognition, and finally, a profound, heart-stopping stillness. He took the box from my hands, his fingers tracing the grain of the wood as if he were greeting a long-lost friend. He opened it and stared at the unopened letter lying inside. For a moment, he didn't speak. The silence in the modern office was as thick and heavy as the dust-filled air of my grandmother's attic. "I never gave it to her," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "I stood across the street from her house all night, this box in my coat pocket. I watched the lights in her window, and I just couldn't. I felt like a fool. A boy with a crush on a woman who deserved a king. She never knew, I said softly. The letter was never opened. I was the first to read it. He finally looked up at me, his eyes glistening. She passed away then? I nodded. 3 months ago. He sank into a chair, his architect's hands, which had designed great buildings, now trembling as he held the small letter. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. He had written it. He knew every word by heart. We talked for hours. He told me about his life. He had married, had 2 children, and was now a grandfather himself. His wife had passed away a few years ago. He'd had a good life, a full life. But he admitted, with a quiet vulnerability that touched me deeply, that he had never forgotten Eleanor. She was, for him, the quiet what-if, the ghost of a different path his life could have taken. Tell me about her, he said, his voice earnest. Was she happy? And so I told him. I told him about her garden, her fierce independence, her quiet contentment, her love for her family, and her unwavering loyalty to my grandfather's memory. I described the life she had built, a life of simple, profound beauty. As I spoke, I realized something. Michael's love hadn't been a tragedy. It was a quiet, beautiful, and unseen thread in the tapestry of my grandmother's life. And my grandmother's contentment wasn't a sign of something missing. It was a testament to the love she did have, the life she did choose. Before I left, Michael asked if he could keep the letter. Of course, I said. It was always meant for you, in a way. You wrote it to her, but it was your story. He walked me to the door of his office. Thank you, Sophia, he said, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. You've given me a gift I never knew I needed. You've closed a chapter that I left open for 40 years. Flying home, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The story of the lost letter wasn't a sad one. It wasn't about regret or missed opportunities. It was about the enduring power of love, even love that is never spoken. Michael's love had existed, pure and true, and it had mattered, even if my grandmother never knew. It had shaped the man he became. And now, by finding it, it had shaped me too. That night, I sat once more by the window in my grandmother's house, looking out at the roses, their dark shapes swaying in the gentle night breeze. I no longer held the letter, but I held its story inside me. The house no longer felt empty. It felt full, brimming with the quiet, powerful love of all the lives that had been lived within its walls. Some stories, I now understood, don't need to be told to be true. They live on in attics, in dusty boxes, in the hearts of shy boys who become great men. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they find their way into the light, not to change the past, but to illuminate it, proving that love, in all its forms, truly does find a way to live on. It just doesn't always live in the way we expect. And that, I decided, was the most beautiful story of all.